All right. Thank you so much for staying with us. We'll begin our first conversation now. And of course, we've been talking about issue-based campaigns in Nigeria as the presidential election draws closer. How are the presidential candidates handling this? Today, we'll be looking into the blueprint, the economic blueprint of the People's Democratic Party and its presidential candidate. Do remember that former vice president and the presidential candidate of the People's Democratic Party, PDP, Atiku Abubakar, on Monday, the 16th of January 2023, presented his party's economic blueprint to the Nigeria Economic Summit Group presidential dialogue on the economy in Lagos, and that's a bulky 79-page blueprint. He gave an insight into how his party hopes to tackle the challenges facing Nigeria, which he described as being connected to poor economic performance and its consequences on Nigerians. He also adds that it is critical at this time to get the economy right. So what is in this document, and how is the PDP and its presidential candidate intending to deliver on this economic blueprint? We'll have the spokesperson of the People's Democratic Party Presidential Campaign Council, Charles Aniagwu, joining us now virtually. Thank you so much, Charles, and good to have you again on KAKAAKI, the African Voice.
Good morning, Kole and Hijiji. It's nice to be here.
Good morning, Mr. Aniagwu. Moving straight, to the conversation, we're looking at the economic blueprint as presented by the presidential candidate of the PDP. First, let's look at that outing for you. I'm sure that the presidential candidate delivered. I'm sure he delivered the message well.
Well, I was there live. In all honesty, we feel quite pleased with the performance of our presidential candidate and, of course, his running mate in the course of traversing the length of this country and breadth of this country. And in the course of presenting his economic blueprint to the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, he was very clear on two major issues. One is the issue of the human capital, and then two is the focus that he's going to deploy that human capital to be able to realize recovery of our economy. Now, in the aspect of human capital, Atiku made it very, very clear that he dovetailed into his decision to also unite the country, and that in doing so, he will identify eggheads, irrespective of the political party where they belong, which was also what he and Obasanjo did in 1999, to bring in individuals across political divide, and of course, individuals who are not even in the political system but have got the ability to be able to add value in terms of recovering our economy. That is going to be very, very careful and very, very instructive in dealing with such issues as to identify those persons that have got what it takes to now drive the policies that will lead to the recovery of our economy. And having made it clear that he's going to do that beyond his political party, and including Nigerians in the diaspora, Atiku now says that he has been able to put together a policy that will facilitate a very warm handshake with the private sector. And being able to make it clear that the private sector do have a very, very critical role to play in reviving our economy, and that in doing so, he's quite pleased with the interface with the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, where you have a whole lot of individuals who are playing in the big space in our economy, that beyond the fact that he has been able to put together a blueprint, that he will not also hesitate to take further suggestions and further input from members of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group. And he gave an example of what he did with what he and Obasanjo did while they were in power, that almost on quarterly basis, they were having interface with different sectors of our players in our economy, which is what is lacking at the moment. That at one time or the other, they meet with those who are in the banking sector. At other times, they meet with other industrialists. And at other times, they also meet with other persons who are into manufacturing, and that helped them in a long way to identify the many challenges that these different players in these different sectors may be encountering or are likely to pose threats to their survival, and of course being able to play very, very effectively. And you could bear witness that that interface in the course of the administration helped very, very well in midwifing a number of economic policies which they brought to bear in the course of that 8 years that he and Obasanjo had cause to hold sway in our country. And now speaking specifically as to what he wants to do, which he has already put together in that document titled The Covenant with Nigerians, which is now a policy document of he and his running mate, Governor Kowa of Delta State. Atiku says in that interface with the private sector, he will also in the medium term, approach the National Assembly for the purpose of tinkering with our constitutional provision that places certain responsibility on the exclusive list, which makes it only the responsibility of the federal government to carry out certain functions. One of such is what we are doing, what we're having now in the power sector. Yes, there seems to be some form of quasi-liberalization of that sector, but it has not been backed by relevant laws, such that you take away both transmission, generation, distribution, and then make it possible for individuals to be able to generate power if they have the capacity, and then distribute what you can call captive power, like what we're doing in Delta. Here in Asaba, almost every government facility is powered by our independent power plant. What that does is that you are able to have a reasonable amount of power supply, which today most Nigerians agree is the bane of our development. And that once is able to address that issue of the challenge of power through this decentralization of the generation, distribution, and of course, transmission of power, that would have been able to a very large extent address the many challenges facing particularly the micro and medium scale industries we have in this country. But moving away from that, Atiku is also very, very clear on the fact that he's going to put together a $10 billion intervention to help these micro and medium scale industries for them to also become players in our economic space. Taking an example from what is happening in a place like China. And so all that are packages that he is going to unfold, which is running made for the purpose of facilitating a very, very effective and a quick recovery of our economy, which today is believed to be in a very comatose situation.
All right, you have actually touched on a few points from what he talked about, the document. But let's look at this specific, because he talked about how his policies will revitalize what he termed the real sectors of the economy. That's the non-oil sector now, including agriculture and the manufacturing sector, and of course the MSMEs that you talked about. But the question has always been the hows, because we also do know that this current administration talked about how to revitalize the agricultural sector and has made a lot of intervention, but people are still hungry as we speak. So how would these policies manifest in the lives of the people?
I'm sure you know that one of the companies today owned by Atiku is into farming, which is of course production. The other day, in the course of my interaction with you, I made it clear that Atiku is the only presidential candidate amongst the many that are seeking to become our president that is into production. And so for others, they can be mounting from consumption to production, which is T's theory. Atiku is already practicalizing it. And being a farmer and somebody who owns Adama farms and into the production of both beverages and a whole lot of value in the food value chain, he already knows that for the private sector to have a role, you need to be able to stimulate certain processes, including making it possible for them to have access to soft loans that will not drown their initiatives. That once you do that, you would have been able to also ensure that access to land, which is a very, very important capital in the agricultural sector, is also made much more easier than it is today. I can give you an example of what we're also doing in Delta, and good enough, he has also identified that as one of the reasons why he also picked Okowa as a man who understands that for the private sector to play a role, you need to be able to stimulate certain processes, tinker with your legislation in such a way that individuals who go into such businesses or such ventures are also protected legally, and they are not falling short or possibly falling foul of the law. And so, specifically, Atiku is very clear that to stimulate growth in the agricultural sector, you need to make access to farm inputs such as fertilizer, such as tractors, such as other needed facilities, including, of course, seedlings, much more easier for farmers to access. And that in doing so, it is not only to engineer the farmers to produce, that you must also add a lot of value in the food value chain, that the man who produces must also have access to processing. That if you produce and it's not processed, a number of times you have some of this produce having to rot. And because the farmer is scared that he does not want his farm produce to perish, he ends up selling them at prices that are far below what he's supposed to, and at the end of it, he's not able to realize the value that ordinarily he should have been able to obtain from such a produce and the effort he has put in. And so Atiku is looking beyond giving them access to farm inputs, in which case that now stimulates production. But after you are produced, Atiku is also interested in the other value chain, which of course speaks to how you are going to dispose what you have produced, which of course addresses the issue of properly processing. And once you process, it means you are adding another value to that raw material, and not like what we have today, for instance, in the oil sector, where we drill our oil and we're only very busy in exporting the crude. When in actual fact, there are a whole lot of other value that you could derive from the crude beyond the fact that you ship it and that you are importing PMS, which is a premium motor spirit. There are other condensates and other value that you get from that crude. Gas is gotten from that crude. Diesel is gotten from that crude. Kerosene, which is DPK, is gotten from that crude. So once you process it, and in the case of agricultural produce now, for instance, you are into the growing of palm trees. If you are able to grow and process your palm trees, there are many other products, derivatives from the palms. You could even use the shell of the palm fruit to also go into some form of construction. You could use like the symbol of APC today. You could use the palm fronds to even produce brooms. So once you go into that and you enable people to have access to processing plants, they are able to realize much more value from what they have. The man who wakes up and sells off his cassava farm without processing it may not realize that he can afford to both have cassava in terms of the staple food, and at the same time even also have starch, and at the same time able to also produce starch that you eat and the starch that you need for the purpose of ironing your clothes and all that. So all those are some processes that Atiku will say is going to put in place for the purpose of incentivizing the persons who are going to go into agriculture. That is in terms of crop production. But in terms of animal production and aquaculture, he has also been able to outline a number of processes to make it possible for them to also have access to veterinary services, in addition to having a soft loan, like I said earlier, that will make it possible for them to expand, and then a lot of training that will also go into it. All these are very, very critical aspects of the farming processes that the farmer need to be exposed to, so that beyond being crude and farming being done at subsistence level, we're able to now escalate it so that a number of individuals take it to the commercial level, where beyond feeding themselves and feeding those around them, they can also earn a living, and then of course acquire or possibly access other better things that makes life quite exciting, because they're able to earn a reasonable income. So there is a whole lot of how. In addition to irrigation farming, which he also says that the farmers today don't have enough money to be able to perhaps have access to water, except of course we just depend on rain, especially for those of us in the south. But that in agriculture, for you to have all year round farming, you need to just go beyond the natural causes of having to have a seasonal rainfall, which possibly may last for a period of 4 or 5 months, and thereafter the rest 7 or possibly 8 months becomes period of drought, where you are not able to do anything. And that even in the issue of animal husbandry, that it will be made possible for those who are into cattle rearing, for them to be able to also have ranches, and then possibility of them having access to funds to be able to deal with those ranches, and that will also address the issue of headers and farmers clashes. So in college, I can tell you that Atiku has been able to identify a very, very clear pathway to ensuring that these policies are indeed followed up with a whole lot of hows. And these are some of the highlights of some of the issues that he has put together to be able to re-engineer the processes in the agricultural value chain and possibly bring down this very, very disturbing food price inflation.
All right, let's look at the presentation, aspects of the presentation by the presidential candidate of the PDP, Atiku Abubakar. In that presentation, he noted that the APC-led government is dressing Nigeria in borrowed robes. And it goes further to say that borrowing money in order to feed would be considered to be broke. Even though the Minister of Finance has come out to say that Nigeria is not broke severally, and the country has not also defaulted in debt repayment. In that same presentation, Atiku Abubakar also goes on to say that Nigeria's infrastructure will require approximately $3 trillion over the next 30 years, and this will mean financing requirement of approximately $100 billion every year. That's per annum. And he says, we know this cannot be met by the public sector alone. So now I'm asking, you are saying that the APC government is dressing Nigeria on borrowed robes. And in this statement, he's also saying that we require $100 billion per annum, and the public sector alone cannot do it. Does that not mean that you're also going to be borrowing, and Nigeria will continue to still be in this robe?
It is very true that the APC-led administration is addressing Nigeria in borrowed robes. I'll give you an example, and for you to know that you don't even need to be an economist to know that we are broke as a country. If you decide to cook a very wonderful rice that looks very, very good, and then make it available to the blind because you think he may not know that there are stones, the moment he just take the first spoon and put it in his mouth, his teeth and his tongue will inform him that there are stones in that rice. If you also have a child and you say, look, there's enough food in the house, and then as you are going out, you say, please, when you're hungry, make sure you drink water. And then when you're hungry again, drink water. That automatically tells that child that there is no food to eat. In the case of APC, in the 2023 budget, we have as much as over 11 trillion as what? As deficit. Why are you doing that if you have money? Apart from that, the better part of that budget is going to also, even the other ones will just even also come from borrowing. So to the extent that they are even borrowing to pay salaries. Once you are borrowing for the purpose of recurrent expenditure, you are even automatically broke. Not to talk of when you don't have even a single farthing for the purpose of addressing infrastructure, particularly on the capital side of the budget. So Atiku does not even need to remind Nigerians that we are broke, because from what we see, both based on the budget of the APC at least in the last 3.5 years, you could see that they are not even able to generate enough resources to pay for salaries and other recurrent aspects of the budget, let alone being able to carry out infrastructure, construction and all that. Now, moving away from that particular issue, to tell you why indeed they are addressing our country in borrowed robes. There are a whole lot of failures that were witnessed in the APC. Most importantly, when they were coming in 2015, it came with 3-point agenda, principally to address the issue of insecurity, to address the issue of the economy, and of course to address the issue of anti-corruption. You do know, as somebody who is in the media world, that they have failed very, very woefully on these 3 points. And if you have failed on the points that you promised that you are going to be able to give to the people, and you are coming again to talk about a renewed hope, and let me tell you, Aniagwu, why they are looking for how to distract Nigerians. You look at the macabre dance they are doing with one blackmailer they call Mike Atimu. It is because they don't just have what to tell Nigerians, and they are beginning to look for ways of distracting us from the main issues. The main issues are very, very clear in this election. It is the issue of the fact that we have become much more divided as a country, and unity have eluded us. It is the issue of the fact that our economy is in a very, very parlous situation in such a way that most of our people have lost their job, to the extent that we have over 66% unemployment at the youth level, and then over 33% unemployment generally. And it has been very well reported by an agency of government which they supervise that no fewer than 133 million Nigerians have gone into what they call multi-dimensional poverty, in which case you are poor almost all around. You don't have water to drink, you don't have food to eat, you don't even have good clothes to wear, you cannot even pay for your electricity. You know, when they use the word multi-dimensional, it looks very, very nebulous and amorphous that you may not be able to break it down. What it means is that it is abject poverty, the poverty that can smell, that if you put your nose, you smell that poverty. That is what the APC have led us into. And an administration and a party that have led us into that, rather than getting busy to apologize for their abysmal performance, they are now very busy campaigning to go into state capture, such that Siwaji, who have captured Lagos, want to also capture Nigeria. And Nigerians must be very, very mindful of this, Adora and my very good brother, Aniagwu. Why I say so is that if we do not begin to look at the need to recover our country, which is what Atiku and Okowa stands for, we may not realize that the issues of the moment goes beyond political sloganeering, which is why they say renewed hope. You have not given us hope before. Which one are you renewing? For me, it is renewed hopelessness, because they have never given us any hope before. And it is important for those of you, my colleagues in the media, to take very, very clear advantage of the provision of Section 22 of the Nigerian Constitution, which makes it very, very clear that the responsibility of the mass media is to hold government accountable to the people. You do not need to look at those of us who today are playing in the political space to bring it up. You need to be able to interrogate all of us, whether they are in PDP, whether they are in APC, whether they are in the Labour Party, for the good of our country, and to be able to give vent to that constitutional provision as very clearly stated in Section 22 of the Nigerian Constitution. So to put it very, very mildly, Nigeria is broke, but beyond being broke, Nigeria has gotten to an extent that we need a special consultant, not just consultant, a special one to be able to get out of this ICU unit that they have placed our country in the last 7.5 years. And it is in the enlightened interest of every Nigerian not to take any step to begin to look in the direction of the APC, because that will mean having to facilitate the death of this patient that is in the ICU unit. The Tinubu and his cohorts are only interested in state capture, and that's why we must be very, very careful. I don't have another country to go to. I don't intend taking my children out of this country, and in my own interest, beyond politics and that of my children, I will ask anybody, even if you don't even want to vote at all, don't even think in the direction of the APC, because that will be tantamount to killing this our country, particularly at a time that their presidential candidate is not in the best of frame mentally. Of course, you hear the new language now that even the English people are finding very difficult to interpret, the balablu and hulaba. Up to today, they have not been able to tell us what it means. Is that the person you want to make a president? So they have led us astray. They should be busy apologizing rather than asking Nigerians to give them another opportunity to renew the hopelessness they have fostered on us.
All right, so it's important we are talking about these things, that you have just pushed it back to the media, and that's exactly what we do here, to interrogate both those who are aspiring to get to the office and those who are already there as to how you have dealt with Nigeria and how you intend to deal with Nigeria. So getting back to the blueprint of your principal, he talked about the fact that some of the challenges facing Nigeria are interconnected, and these are things that really lead to poor economic performance and the consequences on the people, and one of which he identified is infrastructure deficit. He called it infrastructure financing deficit, and he says that when his government comes on, he will address this by establishing an infrastructure development unit in the presidency with a specific mandate to work with the MDAs to fast track and drive the process of infrastructure development in the country. So the question would be, we have often seen such units created by government, and at the end of the day, you also see corruption, magnifying itself in some of those MDAs and even establishments that are brought up to as intervention agencies to drive some of this process. So how to also monitor activities of this unit, if it is created, becomes also something critical to ensure that it doesn't get corrupt at the end of the day.
I wasn't too young when Atiku and Obasanjo governed this country. And it was also very clear to me that during the military years, and particularly up to 1999, that our country was in the worst of shape. And what did they do? They took steps to begin to bring back our country. The first thing they did was to bring everybody on board, irrespective of the political party you belong, which that time they called forming a government of national unity. And that is what Atiku has again promised. And government of national unity means that irrespective of your political persuasion or your religious leaning or your geographical location, so long as you have the ability to add value, Atiku says he will look out for you and bring you on board. You need human beings to be able to realize the policies that you have set forth, both for yourself and for our country. And what has made it quite exciting for me and a number of other Nigerians is the fact that Atiku and Okowa are talent hunters. Talent hunters in the sense that if you have got the ability to be able to do certain things with minimal supervision, you are brought on board, in which case it's just a little supervision for you to become perfect, and possibly for the purpose of not allowing absolute power to corrupt absolutely. Perhaps that's the only reason why you need supervision. And so that being the case, the nexus that exists between infrastructure and development is very, very clear. It's not even a question of thin line. It's a very, very clear line. And that clear line is to the extent that if a farmer is producing in a particular farm settlement, which of course will not be in the middle of the road, he will need a well-paved road for the purpose of evacuation of those farm produce to the market where he's going to sell, or to the factory where he's going to process. In which case, if you are able to ensure that he has that road well paved to his farm, you would have to a very large extent engineered or possibly giving him the impetus to produce more. Beyond that, if you're also able to take steps to bring in individuals who understand how to run certain sectors. You could see what is happening to the electricity power infrastructure. It is not in the best of shape, whether at the level of the dams or whether at the level of the turbines. Once you are able to address it such that we generate enough power by ensuring that the power infrastructure is rejuvenated, you would have also been able to give strength to a number of industries. And if you have that political will, which I am very sure Atiku will have in abundance, that they need to be able to give strength to what they have promised for the purpose of keeping a name for the future. At this moment, I have had the privilege of interacting with them beyond the fact that I have worked with my governor, Governor Okowa, and my interface with Atiku Abubakar. I am very, very convinced that these two individuals and the number of persons that have brought on board now to be able to guide them, particularly those who are now in the economic team of the Atiku Okowa campaign, will be such that they will be individuals who have got knowledge as to what to do. You remember Fela and Nicola Bokuti of blessed memory, when he sang that carpenter, when they sew like tailor, na Suwebe. Atiku and Okowa are not interested in bringing in Suwebe for the purpose of doing jobs that they are not primed to do. What has killed us today is that the APC-led administration have been very, very busy paying more attention to nepotic values rather than value as to what the individuals can bring aboard. And so you see persons who are made to head economic team who don't understand anything about the economy. And so it becomes a question of a juju priest coming to the church to begin to quote the Bible or possibly taking an aspect of the Quran. It's either he reads it very, very literally and interprets it very, very wrongly, or he is not even able to understand the letterings of these two very powerful holy books. For Atiku and Okowa, it is going to be square pegs in square holes, round pegs in round holes. So that at the end of the day, it becomes having to have people to wear the shoe that not only fits, but the shoe that makes it convenient for them to walk and work very smoothly.
Charles, I talked about this corruption thing really in setting up some of these units, because as good as the government you were talking about was at the time, that Obasanjo and Atiku were today hearing about special purpose vehicles, which also was established at the time, and is being alluded to your principal as the one who initiated that. So this is exactly what happens in government, that the monies that are meant for some of those developmental projects don't get there at the end of the day, and probably you see monies being diverted and all that. Even at the time of your government, 16 billion naira was voted into power, but we never saw that power. So that's why I'm asking that how your government would deal with this issue if your Atiku becomes president, and ensure that special purpose vehicles are not created again to siphon monies away from the country.
Now let me correct you as to the issue of SPVs. SPVs are not criminal innovations. You must understand why special purpose vehicles are usually created. For instance, you remember Transcorp, which of course used to be called Nikon Hilton. There are times where you want to, for a purpose of carrying out construction, production, or even certain things, and one individual may not have all the necessary requirements, or a company that is well suited to do that may not be in existence, and you need about 2, 3, 4 expertise to come together. And at that moment, they are not existing as an entity. Let me give you an example. Today, we have Asaba Airport Company. Before we went into the concession of the Asaba Airport, there was no Asaba Airport Company. When we want to go into concession, it became very clear that only one company do not have the capability to run the airport, and we are advised by our transaction advisors that we need to bring in individuals who have expertise in different areas. For instance, you have to talk about those who can provide the aviation fuel, so that when flights come, they can afford to fuel. You need to be able to bring in those who have the expertise in running terminals. You need to be able to bring in those who have the expertise in dealing with cargo, and a whole lot of value chain in the airport process. And it became very, very clear that giving it to one person may become a challenge, because that one person may not have all you needed. Then we were encouraged to get them to form a special purpose vehicle, through a special purpose vehicle, to establish the Asaba Airport Company, where these different companies become shareholders. And at the end of the day, today, even the Nigerian, the Ministry of Aviation have acknowledged that our airport concession is a wonder that they needed to even come to understudy. And if you come to Asaba Airport today, you will see that it's doing very, very great because a number of other persons who have different expertise in different areas have been brought in for that purpose. So I needed to make that clarification so that individuals do not think that when you talk about SPV, that we are talking about corruption. That's not true. Now, in the particular case that you mentioned, let me also correct you, first of all, that 16 million, happily you said, was voted. When you are in government, you will know the difference between voting and release. When, for instance, the administration of Muhammadu Buhari today have as much as 21 and more trillion naira as their budget, that does not mean that that budget, that money is at hand and is available. That is being voted. It will have been voted to different sectors to run the 2023 fiscal year by the Nigerian government. And so if you get into 2024 and you say that 21 trillion naira was squandered, that will be wrong statistics because that does not mean that the amount budgeted was what was realized. It was clear in the course of investigation by the Elumelu-led committee in the House of Representatives that just $3 billion what was expended by the administration, and a whole lot of value was attained. The challenge they had was that they did not possibly have all they needed to do in terms of feasibility study to realize that for you to site some of the power plants, that you needed to be able to consider access to gas. And so when you take a power plant to a place like Papalanto in Ogun State, the question is, how are you going to fire the turbine? That will depend on gas for the purpose of putting the engines on. And so those were some of the challenges. And of course, there is always what they call teething problem. Just like a small child who is growing the teeth, it pains the child. Sometimes you have some of the teeth is removed, they call it milk teeth, and another time, another ones begin to come back, they call it a much more permanent teeth. Don't forget that we just returned to democracy in 1999. And there were not too many books for them to understand, apart from having to look at what other people are doing outside the shores of the country. Sometimes you may be able to copy, but you are not able to paste. At that moment, it is just a learning curve. Some of the challenges you saw during the Atiku and Obasanjo time were part of the learning curve, which a number of Nigerians were not able to appreciate. That appreciable progress was made in a whole lot of sectors, and that as we were making that progress, it is said that it is not bad for you to fall. But what is bad is that if you fall, you are not able to rise. And in the course of that falling, they were able to rise in a number of areas, which is why, beyond the issue of establishing anti-corruption agencies such as the EFCC and the ICPC, for the purpose of curbing corruption at the level of the curative angle, they were able to realize that beyond having to wait for people to commit corruption before you begin to teach them, that it was important to be able to bring in policies that will lead to much more preventive, which is why the offices like the Due Process Office and many other innovations were brought in to reduce the propensity for individuals to help themselves with public funds. And I can tell you, what Atiku is said to do is the political will to drive the processes. So when special purpose vehicles are being set up, they are going to be set up for the purpose of re-engineering and, of course, recovering our system. And as per the one you referred to, we may need to listen very, very carefully to that audio. I am not one who want to go into the debate, even if it was coming from a blackmailer. Unfortunately, APC, that one that sent him because they want to distract everybody from the real issues, are going to town to celebrate. There is nothing for them to celebrate. They have lost this election. The man said that the former vice president and the presidential candidate of the PDP and my principal made it very, very clear that corruption, that open corruption is a very dangerous thing and must not be tolerated. What that tells you, first of all, is that the man is against corruption. And I said, if at all you need anybody to give you money for you to do something, you can empower the person to do a job somewhere. And if he finishes doing a job, just like saying, thank you, and he decides, okay, we are going to these people who have helped us. How do we also at least reciprocate for the purpose of assisting them? Let me tell you, let nobody come and begin to play the ostrich. For God Almighty, we don't have money to bribe him. What we use in appreciating God is the praise that we give him. You remember David in the Bible. After he has committed all the atrocities and everything that he does, he goes back to God and begin to play song and begin to dance. I don't want to call it bribe, but that is a way of also getting the attention of God for God to do more for him. So when they say appreciation is application for more, when individuals are given jobs by government And at the end of the day, they come back to say, okay, how do we also help this government for the purpose of getting them to win election and for the purpose of helping them to function? It is also in line with appreciation and possibly application for more. Obasanjo and Atiku, at that time as the president and the vice president, had the power to have been able to direct, like Idi Amin was doing, the Minister of Finance and the Accountant General of the Federation to bring money and put it into a particular place. They didn't do that because they have value and respect for our system. So when APC is dancing, which is what they are doing, what is the source of finance of the presidential candidate of the APC? A man who has captured Lagos State and want to capture Nigeria. And these are the people talking. And I was listening to my friend, Festus Keyamo, and I begin to wonder sometimes how he actually became an SAN. Because when he argues, like when he says, a man that is constitutionally given the power to head the National Economic Council, he says he has no role in the economic thing. Why have they themselves not scrapped the Economic Council that is headed today by a man we respect so well, Oshibajo? A man we believe that if they were reasonable enough to have supported in their party, there would have been a contest. Festus Keyamo is selling Tinubu, a man that has not been able to tell us what Hulaba and Balablu means. That is what Festus Keyamo, a man that calls himself an SAN, is selling. And he wants you to believe that he's a man of integrity. If you have integrity, you must put Nigeria first. And Atiku or Okowa will put Nigeria first. So in calling, don't allow those blackmailers to sway you to begin to think that they are making any point. They are not making any point. They have seen that they are very, very low in this contest. And the only way they can think that they can gain more ground is to take us away from the issues. And I must appreciate you, and through you to appreciate the entire management of that communication for bringing us back to the path of progress, which is to deal with the issues. And that is what we're dealing with this morning, to ensure that at the end of the day, our pathway to recovery is not only very, very clear, but very, very visible for even the blind to appreciate, and of course for the deaf to understand.
All right, Charles, you spoke earlier about the power sector. Looking at the presentation, it's quite glad to know that the presidential candidate of the PDP says that, or knows that the average Nigerian, most Nigerians will simply desire to get home, watch the news, and sleep under a ceiling fan, and I'll add maybe under an air condition. Now, in that presentation, he has also said that in handling the issue of power supply, he will, within the first year of the administration, initiate and implement an emergency power program that can deliver additional capacity in certain key areas. And he will propose a legislation for the removal of the entire electricity value chain from the exclusive list so as to give state powers to generate and transmit, distribute electricity for themselves. Now, I'm bringing you to the privatization of the power sector. Has your principal considered the fact that even under this administration, there were moves, to try to unbundle, to make the power sector more effective? But what we are being told is that there are legal constraints, signed during the privatization for the power. Has he considered that when he says that he will bring up a legislation that will entirely, take out all the value chain so that he can remove, the entire value chain from the exclusive list to the states? Has he considered that clause, that legal constraint that is affecting us due to the contract signed?
Well, the major challenge we're having now, if you must realize, is the issue of transmission, which is, of course, still centrally controlled. Generation has to a very large extent be diversified in such a way that there are a number of persons that are getting involved. And then at the level of distribution, of course, the different discos. For instance, in Abuja, you have the Abuja discos that takes care of both Abuja and the environs. In places like Delta and Edo, and then parts of Ondo, you also have the Benin discos. These discos are in charge of distribution, but you must first of all transmit the power that is generated before you can begin to even distribute. And so once you have challenge in the transmission lines because of the issue of capacity, you are certainly going to have challenge at the level of distribution, because if they don't transmit, you are not going to have what you are going to distribute, even if it's generated. And so what Atiku is saying is that if you look at what we do in our different homes, we have different generators. Some person will have 10 kVA, some will have 15 kVA. Sometimes you get to a house where all the power needs of that house is not even up to 5 kVA. Yeah, the man is running a 10 kVA generator. But if you combine all these, for instance, in a community and you have about 20 generators, when you put the combined power in those generators, it may give you up to even 1,000 kilowatts, which of course is 1 megawatt of electricity. That if ordinarily these things are combined, it is possible for even like in an estate for them to have clean power and at a lesser cost. and of course with emission also heavily reduced. But we are not doing that. If you look at the cost of purchase of those different generators, the cost of doing so many things, you will discover that if you have an independent power plant, that you would have been able to scale through, even if the bill you pay may be a little higher. In the long run, you are gaining more because you are no longer going to be involved in the issue of individual repairs of your generators. You are not going to be involved in individual acquisition of the whatever source of power, whether it's gas or diesel or petrol. Of course, for those heavy engines, you are talking about either gas or diesel for the purpose of powering those generating sets. But in this case, he is going to ensure that states that have got the capacity, like we have done in Delta here in Asaba, which I spoke to earlier, that you will be given that power to be able to do so and provide to your people. Once we begin to have this different captive power in different areas to address certain needs, that you don't have the plumber or the cobbler does not need to begin to get worried about whether there is crisis between federal government and the energy generating workers who goes on strike and you don't have light and federal government is not able to meet up their distance. How does that affect the micro person who is willing to even pay his bill and then get his job done? But this idea of having this behemoth, leaving it in the hand of the federal government to control everything has been a challenge. And whether we like it or not, that is not what is done in developed climes. If you go to South Africa, if you go to the United States of America, you go to Great Britain, you have private sector players. There are companies, for instance, a company as big as Nigerian Breweries or Guinness Nigerian Limited PLC may have the capacity to generate their own power and then produce what they want to produce.
Well, boss, thank you very much. Charles Aniagwu, the spokesperson of the People's Democratic Party Presidential Campaign Council, who has joined us to look at the economic blueprint of the People's Democratic Party and the candidate and how the party and the candidate intends to actualize this if and when they get into power. Charles, we must thank you so much for your time on the show.